7:30, a special edition of our news stream here on News for Utah Plus. Brian McElladden here with Lindsay Aerts. Lindsay, my goodness, a big story here for anyone who is concerned about public lands and the intersection of federal policy and local policy, right? Big deal.
Yeah, big deal for sure. Today we had President Donald Trump sign 2 executive orders shrinking both Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument and Bears Ears National Monument. So those are 2 separate monuments. Grand Staircase is in Garfield and Kane counties, and then Bears Ears is in words are escaping me, the county that it's in, but Bears Ears is down on the eastern side, like Blanding area, kind of down San Juan County. Thank you, San Juan County. So why this is such a big deal, Brian, is this is the latest in a ping-ponging that all the administrations have done over the last 30 years. So Grand Staircase was designated in 1996 by President Bill Clinton. In 2017, both the monuments got shrunk by President Trump. Then they got restored by President Biden. So you can see Republican, Democrat, and now the Republican again, President Trump, is shrinking their size again.
I think you referred to it earlier as a political football.
Yeah, political football, ping-ponging, whatever sports reference you want to use, back and forth is how it's going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you put together a story for us a little earlier today. Why don't we go ahead and roll that story, and then we can talk about whatever loose ends we need to talk about on the other side.
Let's sign. This is very nice. I'm very happy about this.
President Trump signed those orders in the Oval Office in the company of Utah's congressional delegation, Governor Spencer Cox, and House Speaker Mike Schultz. Utah's Republican delegation has long argued that the monument size restricted access to things like grazing, hunting, and local recreation, and was too big.
This matters to Utah. We believe that under the Antiquities Act, it's very clear.
Almost area compatible with the objects to be protected. That's always been the standard under the Antiquities Act.
But environmental groups say the land is sacred and needs to be protected.
Frankly, this is worse than we expected, but it feels consistent with this administration and its efforts to, frankly, dismantle the system of federal lands.
Obviously, today's move is just the latest in a decades-long political football that has both grown and shrunk their size over the last 30 years. But today's order means more Utah land will no longer be federally restricted. Garfield County Commissioner Leland Pollock says that's a good thing.
It's a blessing. It's a blessing to Garfield and Kane County and San Juan County. What happened in 1996 was, in my opinion, was the real crime.
But questions remain about what will become of these lands that were once protected under monument boundaries.
That is BLM rangeland. It goes back to the BLM field office. It is protected. And basically the same protections that are there, the same federal regulations that protect the monument through the BLM. The BLM Bureau of Land Management has always had it. So these people that are going to say, oh, they're taking away the protection, that's just absolutely false. That's more propaganda.
SUA has already signaled that they plan to sue.
That these lands were going to be preserved for current and future generations. With this stroke of his pen, the president is trying to undo that, and we're going to fight that effort.
Okay, mark his words. The lawsuit's coming, Lindsay. That's what it sounds like.
It very well could be. So obviously you can see that the two sides have just different opinions about, one, what the Antiquities Act means and is interpreted to mean, and then two, how we should circle these lands, how much of them need to be circled, and what the protections actually are.
So can I ask, because the county commissioner said something interesting. He said basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the protections are going to remain. It's just the BLM is going to manage that land that is no longer within the boundary.
Right.
But my understanding of the Bureau of Land Management is that that agency has to balance the interests and the needs of various stakeholders. So recreationists, hunters, potential extractive industries. So is there a potential here that we could see once formerly protected land open to drilling and like mineral rights and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so essentially what we're talking about here is multiple use, right? We're talking about the boundaries around a certain amount of land in southern Utah, and the size of those boundaries. So what happens now under the current boundaries that President Trump just shrunk is only certain things can happen via a national monument, right? So there's even a rule like a heartbeat rule. You can only have so many heartbeats on the land at one time to help preserve it, right? And that includes things like an animal's heartbeat and a human's heartbeat, right? So those all count towards how many people can be in that land. The land outside of the national monument, you can, that's still BLM land and subject to what you're saying, the same BLM protections, but presumably you can do other things on that land that's not restricted by that national monument designation. So yes, if you get the proper permits, could you drill? Potentially. Could you sell off some of that land and build housing on it? Potentially. Now,
because that has been talked about in Utah.
Right. It has been talked about in the past. And I'm not suggesting that any of those things are going to happen, or even that's the reason why Republicans wanted to shrink this. But I'm just saying that it's now possible, right? And that's why this thing is such a political hot button issue, is because Democrats are accusing Republicans of wanting to go in there and destroy all the land. And Republicans are saying you're being ridiculous with the Antiquities Act and designating a whole landscape, right, that we don't really need to designate.
Yeah. So okay, our Southern Utah correspondent, Ken Seacrest, we sent him to Escalante today to talk about this and get some reaction, gauge the folks there. Why don't we roll his report and see what they have to say on this?
Here in Escalante, people have lived with the National Monument for nearly 3 decades, and today I found a community that remains deeply divided over what the boundary change could mean for its future. From local businesses to longtime residents, President Trump's executive order has people talking. For some, the reduction of the monument's boundaries brings concerns about what could happen to the land.
We know that we saw a lot of destruction with the last time it shrunk, particularly on really fragile landscape. And I don't think people realize how much that can affect, the breeding of insects and other animals, and, just the loud noises of the ATVs and the marks that they leave, and it's just really destructive.
Patty says she believes the monument's protection should have remained in place and worries about what this second reduction could mean.
It doesn't make sense to me that a president would decide to remove protections from public land.
But not everyone here sees it that way. Kevin Griffin owns the local grocery store in Escalante, and it's a place his family has called home for 7 generations. He believes today's action is a step in the right direction for both local businesses and those who come to recreate.
Most of us on the right, I think we want it gone. We want it completely gone like it was in the 90s. But I think this is a good compromise for both sides to, kind of get what they want a little bit.
Kevin says that his family has watched Escalante change over the past 3 decades and believes the monument has hurt local businesses.
I went to Bryce Canyon a couple years ago in the dead of the winter, and there were more people there in the dead of the winter than we have here in the summer. And I got thinking, it's like, because you can drive right to the park. It's still going to be public land. It's just going to be less restricted.
Whether people see today's order as a win for local control or a loss for public land protections, one thing is clear, that this has been an ongoing issue for years that continues to divide the community here in Escalante. Reporting for ABC4 News, Ken Seacrest.
I love how he captured both sides there, because that really is the crux of it, and how it impacts those locals. I mean, he talked about the tourism industry, right, and people coming down there. I talked to the Garfield County Commissioner today, and he was saying, anyone who tells you that the tourism industry is going to be hurt, that's propaganda, and they're lying to you. Because he says that, people will still come because they're still going to get a national monument, right? They're still going to get that. So he doesn't think those protections will be hurt. And then you also heard the other woman say, no, these lands need to be protected. And then you have tribal nations and people who, use those lands for different things. They worry that artifacts, that roads, that ATVs, that shooting, could come in there and hurt the lands, just destroy the lands just by nature of having more human footprints and animal footprints on them, right? So both sides of this have valid arguments, and it's really why this is such a controversial issue.
I'll tell you what, nothing has, I guess I should say this, living in the West has made me realize that any public lands issue just brings people out of the woodwork, and they get very feisty over it,
Yeah.
and rightfully so. They have passions about it, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
A representative here in Utah, Celeste Malloy, who has been on the public lands issue for quite a while, you talked to her today to try to better understand her thinking as she was in the Oval Office today when President Trump signed that EO. I mean, Utah's federal delegation was.
Yeah, the entire federal delegation, the governor, House Speaker Mike Schultz, they were all there. President Adams wasn't there, I imagine, maybe because he's leaving office at some point. I don't know why he wasn't there, but nonetheless, he wasn't there. So, I mean, it was a pretty incredible, I think, video to see all 6, 8 of them, right, lined up behind the president. I mean, they are signaling that this was what Utahns want, at least the people that they represent, right? That is what they want. But what they really talked about in this meeting was essentially their interpretation of the Antiquities Act. And if you don't know what the Antiquities Act is, it's basically a 1906 law that essentially gave the president the authority to, by executive order, designate federal lands as national monuments because they wanted to speed up the process. Congress can sometimes take a long time, right? And so at the time in 1906, they needed some of these lands to quickly be protected. And so they gave the president this limited slice of authority to be able to designate these. Well, obviously, we've seen one designated and we've seen it shrunk, and then we've seen it expanded and now reshrunk.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, the Antiquities Act is really short. It's like 4 paragraphs, and it just talks about, the president having the authority, and it says by discretion to determine these monument designations. But then it also says to the smallest size capable or whatever the language is, but it basically says to the smallest area necessary to protect the artifacts, right? And that's what Republicans are really hanging their hat on right now, is saying, hey, some of these Democratic administrations have expanded these designations to landscape size, almost 2 million acres, where now we've shrunk it to about 180,000 acres. Like, we don't need this much land designated here. They went way beyond the scope of the Antiquities Act. But at the same time, I pressed Congresswoman Malloy on, who's to say that the president doesn't have the discretion? I mean, the Antiquities Act talks about the discretion of the president to be able to do this. So let's hear what she had to say. Obviously, the Antiquities Act gave the president the authority to designate federal land as monuments. But the controversy over the Antiquities Act is whether a president can come back in and shrink it or expand it. I mean, here you're saying it's okay for this executive authority to do this, but it's not okay for the Democratic president to enlarge it. I mean, help me understand that.
So the language in the Antiquities Act actually says that a president can declare a national monument, but it has to be the smallest area compatible
right,
with
but it also
protecting the
says
antiquities.
Right, but it also says it's the president's discretion about how much needs to be protected.
That's delegated authority from Congress. So Congress in 1906, when we still had homesteading, we were still disposing of land, Congress said sometimes things have to move quickly, and we'll give the president the ability to create national monuments, but we're limiting it to the smallest area compatible with protecting antiquities. What's happened since 1996 is landscape level designations that aren't about protecting an antiquity. They're about changing how a landscape is managed. And that is controversial.
So there you can see how she's interpreting it to say, again, these Democratic presidents have not done the smallest area compatible. And in fact, Utah's in federal court right now, essentially arguing that that's the case. And a federal court has just revived their lawsuit saying, yes, you can challenge Biden's authority essentially on creating it and how he created it. Did he use the smallest area compatible? So that's what Utah's in court right now challenging over. So, wow. I found that interesting. Also, when I talked to Malloy too, there's sort of this fear too, I think, from the other side of this where, now we have all of these lands that, yes, are managed by the BLM, but essentially they're not protected by a national monument, right? And so the question becomes, what happens to those lands now? And I also talked to Malloy about that. Why should Utahns trust that in now these lands that I hear you that they're now BLM lands, right? But the delegation has worked to sell some BLM lands in the past. Why should Utahns trust that these lands now outside of either Grand Staircase or Bears Ears is not going to be sold for housing or for other purposes?
So we have a representative form of government in the United States, and Utahns elect federal representatives and senators to represent us on the national stage. And we, the federal delegation, have been working with Utahns and taking input and bringing that to Washington, D.C. and making sure that the administration knows what Utahns are asking for. And so Utahns have had input both directly and indirectly through their elected representatives of how we want this land managed. And the process does matter. Having input matters. The decisions that are made in Utah really impact Utahns. And I know people all over the country feel like they have a stake in public lands, and those public lands are protected by about a dozen statutes that are on the books. And we can't violate those statutes, but we do have to make sure that Utahns have a say in what happens in our own backyard, and that the process fouls from 30 years ago are still a sore spot in Utah. We have to address them.
Okay, I've heard a little bit about that from her before and other members of the delegation, right? So that's not new, but it's interesting in this context, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, basically, to hear her say that, you know, I guess we've seen a push before to take some federal lands and sell them before. But when that was happening, you know, again, Republicans tend to argue that there are these tracts of land that may not be used for anything else. Like, I mean, it's not like they're saying here that they want to take Zion National Park and build housing on Angel's Landing, right? That's what that's
not going to happen.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. And that's not necessarily going to happen here. But now where you have more lands that are not within this monument scope, it opens them up for BLM to now approve different uses for them. And that's the key. Some people don't trust what those uses are going to be.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about who was in the Oval Office today for the signing of the EO. Again, Lindsay, you gave us a heads up that this was going to happen. Late last week, you said, hey, this EO is coming down Monday afternoon. And the White House was like, no, it's not, you know, nothing to see here right now.
Pure speculation.
Yeah, reporting, good job. But okay, so here we go. Here's the postcard.
Yeah, this is the postcard.
Yeah.
You've got Congressman Blake Moore, Representative Celeste Malloy, Congressman Mike Kennedy, Senator John Curtis, Senator Mike Lee, Governor Spencer Cox, House Speaker Mike Schultz, and then on the far end you have Congressman Burgess Owens. I'm not sure who the woman in the middle is, to be honest, and then President Donald Trump. So that is our entire federal delegation, our governor and our House Speaker, all there. I mean, those are our top state leaders. So every single one of them invited to this meeting at 4:30 Eastern time in the Oval Office, but it was very hush-hush, Brian. Like
what gives? Why the secrecy?
I don't know. When I caught wind of this late last week, the people I talked to could not be named because they weren't at liberty to discuss it publicly, right? But one of them told me that they were invited and got an email to be at the Oval Office on this time. Now, they had also told me that this signing had been in the works for a few weeks and it, for whatever reason, got pushed out. I was told the Secretary of the Interior was supposed to come out a couple of weeks ago. That never happened. And so it sounds like this has been in the works for a few weeks. And you'll also remember that Utah's federal delegation, led by Malloy and Senator Mike Lee, tried to go through a process congressionally to change the management plan on Grand Staircase. And that wasn't changing the boundaries, but rather just changing how what was in the boundaries was managed, and they wanted it to revert back to a Trump-era plan, which allowed for more local control. So they had already tried to do something congressionally, and that didn't go forward because a key deadline was missed. And my sources told me that it was actually Senator Lee's office that missed the key deadline. He maintains the parliamentarian was at fault. But nonetheless, the deadline was missed, and so they weren't able to do this or get some sort of management in a congressional level. And then you see them come out and shrink the boundaries. Like, I'm not sure if the boundaries would have shrunk regardless of if the CRA had gone through. I didn't get to ask Malloy that, but it's, you know, you've seen this push multiple times, and now we're actually having the shrinking of it, which is a big deal. And when you get those 8 people in a room, it's a pretty big deal.
Well, and tell me this. I know We were trying to get a hold of Governor Cox today to get some comment, and we weren't getting a lot of acknowledgement.
They went silent.
Right?
They
went radio silent.
Didn't even respond.
Cox's office went radio silent, and then he turns up in Washington. And the way I understand it is, they usually release like a weekly schedule. They don't have to, but they do.
Right.
This Washington appearance was not on the schedule.
No, it was not.
There was no way for us to know about this unless someone tipped us off.
Right. We get a public schedule from Governor Cox, and there are several times where he has no public events listed on his calendar, and you kind of just assume like maybe he's taking a day off, maybe he's with his family. Like you don't really pry, you don't really ask too many questions. But to have it say no public events and then for him to show up at a major policy that changes a major policy in Utah, I have questions about, right? And I'm actually trying to get him on Inside Utah Politics this week and let him explain. And his spokesperson told me that this was a White House deal. They had to kind of ignore everybody on it. But I sort of posed this question to Malloy too. If all of Utah wants this, then why did they have to be so secretive with the announcement? Like, what would it have hurt to have this known before? I guess the hurt is groups like SUA come out and say, we're going to sue over it, try to stop it. Basically, you tip off the opposition, right? So politically speaking, that's the reason they didn't tell anybody. But just from a transparency point of view, I'm sure it can rub some people the wrong way that there wasn't more transparency around this.
We do have some other reaction coming in. Utah House Democratic leader Angela Romero said this in part: "This back and forth with every administration has to stop. These lands deserve the protections that come with national monument status. The federal government should honor tribal nations' wishes by protecting these sacred lands from unnecessary development and overuse. These are places where tribal history, culture, and spiritual traditions continue today. Future generations deserve the opportunity to experience these places as they have existed for centuries." Again, the House Democratic leader Angela Romero there.
Yeah, so you can see she's on the side of saying these lands need to be protected. She's a tribal leader and one of the only ones, if not the only one, in Utah's legislature. But I think Attorney General Derek Brown, who's currently fighting in court, had a different point of view.
Yes, he said this: "The Antiquities Act was never meant to be a tool for locking up millions of acres with the stroke of a pen. Today's action takes a major step in the right direction of appropriately sized monuments, allowing responsible stewardship that works with our communities, not against them." That goes back to what we were talking a few moments ago, right? Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, so... And then we have the folks from SUA. We have these nonprofit groups that have been watching this like a hawk, right? And threatening lawsuits over this. And no doubt, I suspect litigation will be attempted here.
Yeah, and they've already sued over several aspects of this this monument in the past and past movement on the monument. So no doubt we expect a lawsuit to come. They've sort of signaled that they're gonna fight it, right? Whatever that means, they're gonna fight it. But I guess I'm trying to understand the legal arguments. I mean, essentially, we're going back to the Antiquities Act, right? We're going back to the argument that whether the president has carte blanche authority to do what they see fit with the boundaries, or if the smallest area compatible actually means super small and has to be smaller than a Democrat wants it. You know what I'm saying? Like, clearly the Democrats feel like there are some objects or some land or some cultural significance or scientific significance that needs protected in that way, which is why they designated the boundaries the way they did. However, Republicans argue that they've even admitted that the monuments were too big and that it was a landscape type of protection as opposed to a scientific protection. So it'll be interesting to see what the courts do in this, right? Because there is no clarity in the Antiquities Act. It really is going to come down to interpretation of probably a federal court on what was intended by the Antiquities Act in 1906 when it was put into place. What does it mean now? And Congresswoman Celeste Malloy actually has legislation proposed to get rid of Section 2 of the Antiquities Act, which is basically that smallest area compatible line. She wants to strip that out and put in some more specific protections about when the president can use this power and for what purpose.
Wow. Lindsay, we talked about a lot. It's a lot to take in, especially if you're just now kind of coming into this issue and trying to understand it, which is why we wanted to do this news stream today. Anything else we should mention before we go?
No, I don't. I just don't think this will be the last you see of this
No.
issue. I mean, today's news is sort of like okay, yeah, he shrunk it. That makes sense. So it's not a huge surprise, but it is a huge step, right? Like we knew that they wanted to do this, but for it to actually happen is significant. And to watch what happens with the land outside of the monuments. Should someone be held responsible if any of that land gets damaged? Like, will anyone be held responsible for that? Those are questions that time may only tell.
Okay. Well, thank you for your work watching this and our team here watching it and helping out and tracking developments as they come. More to come on this story, folks. We will have it for you here on News for Utah Plus and abc4.com. So thanks for streaming with us, and the news will be back here tonight at 10 o'clock. We'll see you then.